Good evening. I'm Rachel Floor, Executive Director of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation. I'm delighted to welcome all of you who have joined us online for this exploration of the JFK Library and Foundation's major digital project, Hemingway at the JFK. I'm delighted to have Dr. Sean Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway's grandson, and Sean's wife, Dr. Colette Hemingway, here with us virtually to introduce this evening's program. The Hemingway family have served as steadfast stewards of the Ernest Hemingway collection at the JFK Library, extending the extraordinary legacy of leadership and generosity of Hemingway's late son, Patrick, who we lost just last month at the age of 97. Patrick and his late wife, Carol, helped shape the Hemingway collection into the renowned epicenter of Hemingway studies that it is today, and we remain ever grateful. I'd like to thank all of those whose financial contributions allow the Hemingway collection to thrive. Hemingway Limited, which has served as a leadership supporter of the collection, and the Hemingway at the JFK website, as well as our friends of the Hemingway collection members. The Hemingway collection is a jewel of the JFK Library's arts and culture holdings. President Kennedy admired Ernest Hemingway and his work, and even cited Hemingway's definition of courage as grace under pressure in the beginning of his own Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Profiles in Courage. After Hemingway died in 1961, President Kennedy arranged for Mary Hemingway to return to Cuba to retrieve her late husband's belongings. A few years later, she offered Hemingway's papers, photographs, and selected mementos to Jacqueline Kennedy for inclusion in President Kennedy's library. At the core of the JFK Library's mission is the belief that our history should be accessible to all, so that we can learn not just from the events of the past, but also from the voices, stories, and perspectives of those who lived it. This new website sits at the intersection of our work to expand public access to our holdings and our efforts to further President and Mrs. Kennedy's legacy of supporting the arts. I'm pleased now to welcome Drs. Sean and Colette Hemingway, who together chair our Hemingway Council. The council raises awareness and support for this remarkable national treasure. Sean is the John A. and Carol O. Moran Curator in charge of Greek and Roman art at the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. He is also an author who, in addition to his scholarly works, has edited several collections of Hemingway's short-form writings and a restored version of A Movable Feast. Colette is the writer of numerous scholarly works, a painter, and an accomplished piano player who authored in his time a study of the paintings Hemingway acquired during his lifetime within the context of his life and work. I'll now turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Rachel. Colette and I are delighted to be here with you tonight, and I'm grateful for your kind words recognizing my Uncle Patrick and his indelible impact on the library's Hemingway collection. We all miss him very much. He was delighted by the launch of the Hemingway at the JFK website and would be thrilled to see it continue to evolve. We are so pleased that Dr. Hilary Justice, the JFK Library and Foundation's Patrick and Carol T. Hemingway Scholar in Residence, will be presenting on the Hemingway at the JFK website this evening. This is a very exciting digital project. The world's first authoritative website covering Ernest Hemingway's complete life, times, works, and legacy. This initiative makes the Hemingway collection housed at the JFK Library in Boston accessible to individuals across the globe. It serves as a rich and compelling platform for the primary source materials, as well as the learnings and interpretations of leading experts and scholars. The collection is, as Rachel shared, a treasure. It contains nearly all of my grandfather's known papers and manuscripts, along with photographs, family scrapbooks, books, personal items, artwork, and his extensive correspondence with the literary and cultural figures of his era. Since the website was first launched in late 2023, Dr. Justice and her colleagues have continued to innovate and iterate, implementing new web features, unearthing new connections and insights to highlight and exploring ever more compelling ways to display content. I hope you will all find it as fascinating as I do to peruse the various web pages, which keep growing. The elements of a library's collection, supplemented by materials from Hemingway partners, create an ever-evolving experiential platform for visitors. Many already familiar with Hemingway, and many who are just encountering him for the first time. Through their time spent on the site, they can build their own picture of this great American writer. Colette and I are grateful to Dr. Justice and the team at the JFK Library for their work in making all this possible. And I'm pleased now to invite Colette to share some reflections. Colette.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you, Rachel, as well. President and Mrs. Kennedy's advocacy for the arts and their place in our society remains an inspiration and one we are in need of more than ever today. It is an honor for Sean and me to support the JFK Library's work to expand access to the Hemingway collection. It is an indispensable resource, and engaging with its materials, it is critical to anyone who attempts a definitive study of Hemingway and his writing. Dr. Justice curated the content for this website from an international network of archives, museums, historical societies, and libraries. The written, archival, and audiovisual content provide incredible insight into Hemingway's writing as well as his life experiences. We are also grateful to the scholars who have contributed their time and expertise. This digital initiative is strengthened by the resulting discourse and varied perspectives. I also invite all of you who have contributed I invite all of you to take this opportunity to reach out to the JFK Library if you would like to learn more about the collection, the website, and how you could be a participant in this effort to preserve and perpetuate Hemingway's legacy. Thank you for taking part in this evening's webinar. Rachel, I will now turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Sean and Colette, for so wonderfully setting the stage for Dr. Justice's exploration of Hemingway at the JFK tonight. As we move on to the next part of the program, I invite all of you who've joined us online to share any questions you may have for Dr. Justice about the Hemingway collection and website for the question and answer session. You'll see full instructions on screen for submitting your questions via email or in the chat on YouTube. And we'll have time to ask Hillary those questions after her presentation. I'm now so pleased to introduce the JFK Library's Patrick and Carol T. Hemingway Scholar in Residence, Dr. Hillary Justice, who curates the Hemingway at the JFK Project. Dr. Justice's position is funded by the JFK Library Foundation, the nonprofit partner of the JFK Presidential Library, which is why she's wonderfully able to present this evening's program despite the ongoing federal government shutdown. She is the author of several scholarly works on Hemingway, including The Bones of Others, an analysis of the writer's creative process. She curated the JFK Library's permanent Hemingway exhibit and has served on the boards of the International Hemingway Society and Foundation, the Ernest Hemingway Foundation of Oak Park, and on the editorial board of the Hemingway Review. We are grateful for her tireless work, creativity, and ingenuity over the past 10 years in maintaining the library's position as a vibrant center for scholarship and exploration of Hemingway's life, work, and legacy. Thank you, Dr. Justice, for being here with us tonight. Over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Sean and Colette, for being here. It's so nice to see you. And thank you to everyone who's joining us online for an exploration of the ever-growing digital project, Hemingway at the JFK. The team at the JFK Library and Foundation has worked tirelessly this year, and we're very excited to share with you some of the new features that we have on the website, some new pages, some new functionality, and especially to highlight our first major special section on Mary Hemingway, written by her biographer, Timothy Christian, author of Hemingway's Widow. He wrote the text for it, and it's been just a joy to collaborate with him. So I absolutely cannot wait to share that with you. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and walk you through the web project. And for those of you who were here last year or who have spent any time on the site, this will be a little bit of a review. I feel like I'm teaching a class. So this is the landing page, Hemingway at the JFK. You can get there at jfklibrary.org/Hemingway. So the project started in part from a challenge that I take very personally, and it's how to bring Hemingway to more people, no matter their level of expertise, their level of curiosity, or where they live. And having the position as scholar in residence at the JFK, it's an honor of a lifetime. It's also a little daunting because the collection is enormous. And where do you start? And so one of my goals has been to bridge between the collection, which if you want to do research in the Hemingway collection, when there's not a government shutdown, you come to Boston and you do research in the archives. That's simply not possible for so many people. And yet, with my own experience as a researcher at the JFK, it's just the feeling that you get when you're working with Hemingway's materials, it's indescribable. You get goosebumps. You see Hemingway in new ways with practically every photograph, every page that you turn. And sharing that experience as broadly as possible was one of the goals of this project. Also, there are a lot of websites about Ernest Hemingway, and some of them are very well written, some of them are lovingly curated, but they tend to be fairly niche. And as I was talking about this project initially with leadership at the JFK Library and Foundation, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could serve as sort of a central location to provide people with accessible, also authoritative information about Ernest Hemingway? Everywhere I go, when people ask me what I do for a living and I say I'm a Hemingway scholar, I immediately get their opinions about Hemingway, their favorite books, their favorite questions. Hemingway is pervasive in Anglophone culture. It literally does not matter where you go. Someone will want to talk to you about Hemingway. So I thought, how can I connect our work at the JFK and in the archives and in the collection with a broader audience? And so this project is designed to do that. We had some technical challenges. I have to give a shout out at the outset to the amazing team who I work with, both at the JFK and with our external development team. They are talented and passionate, and over our last 5 years developing the site, they have all sort of fallen in love with Hemingway, his biography, his life, his times, something. There's something in Hemingway's world for almost everyone, even if they're initially skeptical, which some people are. So our first challenge was how to integrate a special section on Hemingway within an existing website dedicated to President Kennedy. And so we came up with this design that looks similar, but it's colored a little bit differently. And we designed it sort of contrarily to look like a book. The paper color, our background is not white, it's old paper colored. And we went with a serif font, despite the fact that that's, considered old-fashioned. And I'm like, look, we're talking about history. Hemingway was born in 1899. Let's make it look like a book. And so we designed the pages to echo, not mimic exactly, the look of Hemingway's earliest first editions. So when you get here, there's always a question with Hemingway, where do I start? There's so much to learn, so much to look at. And so organizing everything Hemingway and keeping it simple and easy to navigate, we've divided it into people. Right now that's family, but that is about to change. We have some scholars who are going to come in and work on some of Hemingway's friends. Periods, if you're interested in a chronology. Places, because oh my gosh, one of the wonderful things about studying Hemingway is you get inspired to follow in his footsteps and you literally get to go everywhere. When I was a graduate student, I would take my backpack and almost no money and just get to where Hemingway had been. It was very exciting. And a lot of people do that, whether or not they're professional Hemingway scholars. A lot of people do it just for the love of the adventure. And then also, of course, Hemingway's works. we'll be in all of these different top menus tonight, but the first thing I would like you to do is I'd like you to imagine that you are a student and you have an assignment on Hemingway and you're curious. Maybe not terribly curious, but at least a little. Chances are excellent that students will come to this website because they need to learn something about Hemingway's works. One of the things that the team at the JFK Library and Foundation did this year is we've completely revamped the complete works pages. So that's the first place that I'm going to take you. There's always a question. Hemingway, first of all, wrote many more works than the number of his book titles would suggest. He was a prolific and powerful crafter of short fiction. That's one of my academic specialties. So been very excited to think about Hemingway's complete works in the aggregate. But when you're building a website and you're sharing it with people, you don't know how they're going to use it, you don't know what they're going to want. You get to imagine yourself into a bunch of different subject positions. So in addition to providing just a list of Hemingway's works by title, we've also added this year Hemingway's works by the date they were written and also by the date of their first publication. I'll be going back to by the date they were written because that was especially fun and it's interesting to see. You can also just get a list of Hemingway's books, a list of his short stories, and then there are a couple of groups of Hemingway's stories that people refer to so frequently that we felt they merited inclusion here. One of them is The Lost Manuscripts, which is really more of a concept than a list of stories. And the other is the Nick Adams stories. A lot of the people who I meet in my travels or who approach me and say, hey, talk to me about the Nick Adams stories. It's a known group and we wanted to respect and acknowledge that. We'll do more with the Nick Adams stories in a minute. But first, I want to go back up to these two categories, Hemingway's works by date written versus by date of first publication. You would think, with such a prolific and professional writer, that these two lists would be incredibly similar, but they're not. So what we're going to do is we'll go to Hemingway's works by date written. And this, after some introductory text, which it was a privilege to write, we've changed the look of these pages entirely, and we've provided more information. All of this information is available on each of these pages, whether you're going by title or by date of first publication. But we've gotten the cover image of whatever journal or magazine their short stories were published in, and also the first editions of the books. And so if you go through Hemingway by the date he wrote the story, he published his first story when he was in high school, in his high school literary magazine. No one can afford these. You can't check them out of a library. But it's lovely to know that they existed. The next earliest story that's been published was actually published in 2017 in Sean's Hemingway Library edition of Hemingway's short stories. Hemingway wrote it in a hospital bed in Milan when he was wounded in World War I, but it didn't see publication for almost 100 years. And so this is one of those first publication, first written. I mean, this is the example right here. I'm actually lucky for the purposes of the presentation that this happens so early in the website. And you can go on from there. And what this page does is it gives you the opportunity to see Hemingway's works in context of each other and consider them as Hemingway considered them. He writes this, he writes the other thing. He might be working on a couple of things at the same time. He did that occasionally. But for the most part, we've been able to establish, other scholars have worked on this, I've worked on this. There are excellent references and primary scholarship. We pretty much know when everything was written. And then you end up with these lovely challenges like the complete short stories written 1921 to 1959. So you can see how many years of professional work is contained in each of the collections. I'm going to go back up now. and highlight something else that our tech team has come up with, which is sort of internal section navigation, which makes life a little bit easier if you're like, well, maybe I want them by title. Okay, here they are alphabetically. And for each, you get whether it's a book, whether it's a collection. Hemingway did write some poetry, not a lot. Whether it's a book, it's a short story, when it was written, when the date of the first publication is, who the first publisher was. And in some cases, it's a little surprising. For an African story, it was Sports Illustrated. You also get the first publisher. So you get all of this complete information. And here you can just get them by title. It's very easy to search it that way. We offer the same information in the order of first publication to give you the opportunity to experience Hemingway's works as the world first experienced them. So by date written, it's how Hemingway experienced them himself. In date of first publication, you get to see, okay, well, you know, if I were a reader in 1942, which Hemingway books could I have access to and which would I not know about yet? I'm not exactly sure how this page might be used, but I'm certain that with the creativity of people on the internet and people just generally, there are many more applications than we actually know about. I'm now going to go back to the works landing page and imagine that you're a student who has to think, for whatever reason, about the Nick Adams stories. This is an imaginary question, and it's going to give us a through line of what's available on the website and the newest highlights. As we go through this, I'll be highlighting information, resources that have been shared with us by the countless institutions and individuals, private collectors, experts, who have very generously allowed us to share what they're most passionate about, things that they've collected online. So after a short introduction to what the Nick Adams stories are and a video presentation I did on them a few years ago, you can get sort of a snapshot right here. We call this the metadata box, which is a very technical term for, I wonder how many things on this site might be connected to World War I. This brings you to a dedicated search page that shows you that right now our live pages that are connected to World War I include Agnes von Karofsky and the Nick Adams stories. It also gives you a complete list of all of the Nick Adams stories, just so you can have it as a snapshot. And then here you can see them in more detail along with the books that they first appeared in. There's that untitled Milan story. Or, you know, you might not care about that. Oops. You might want to see, well, who are some of the people who were involved with the Nick Adams stories? Who inspired them? What do they have to do with? And you might go to check out Hemingway's siblings or Hemingway's first wife, Hadley, who appears as a character in a couple of them. You might be curious about the places that show up in the stories or where Hemingway was when he wrote them. Or you might be curious about which periods of his life they connect to. Nick Adams was actually a lifelong character who Hemingway wrote about a great deal in his early career, but he also returned to write about Nick later. So in my mind, this imaginary student is like, all right, now I know what they are, and I've got a list of them, and all right, I'm supposed to do more, though. And in my mind, this student is a little bit young, and it's like, oh, hey, there's Hemingway as a teenager. I wonder what that's about. So this is where we're going to go next. And this will give me the opportunity to thank some people. So what we have here is a new feature that we've got. It's a new tool that was built specifically for the Hemingway section of the website, but it's also available to content authors everywhere on the JFK site. It enables us to do a timeline and to do a fairly rich one. So Hemingway as a teenager starts in 1910, and I won't go through all of the content on the page, but I would like to show you a couple of other things that we've enhanced this year. One of them is we can now click to enlarge. And so this is a Chicago Sunday Tribune from 1910. Hemingway was following this serial story about a Chicago Tribune cartoonist who had gone on safari in Africa, and he was there with Teddy Roosevelt, who was Hemingway's boyhood hero. Once you've enlarged it, a lot of the images, but not all of them, can be magnified a lot further. So we can see here the eerie fact that Teddy Roosevelt, tossing his gun away and rushing for his pen, looks actually a little bit like Ernest Hemingway would about 50 years after this. The other thing that's new this year is the pages have been interlinked. And so what I'm doing is I'm encouraging discovery and rabbit holes. Just because you're on a page about Hemingway as a teenager, it's like, oh, well, Hemingway grew up to do almost exactly that, that being the safari that Roosevelt went on. If you want to go from right here to a story of that safari, you can now do that. So continuing on, one of our strongest institutional partners is the Ernest Hemingway Foundation of Oak Park and the special collections people at the Oak Park Public Library. So this is one of their resources. It's one of the exciting things. I was talking to Tim Christian last night in a Zoom meeting, and we were talking about the excitement that researchers get when they go someplace and they discover something. They get goosebumps. But researchers who devote their lives to doing this, he's traveled extensively, I've traveled extensively, my colleagues in Hemingway studies have. And being able to bring together a piece of paper in Oak Park with a Hemingway timeline on a website that's being created out of, a Boston organization and making it all coherent, it's sort of bringing the pieces of a life back together. So this particular piece is from Oak Park. It's actually behind glass and it's far too big to scan. So this is a photograph of it. But Hemingway's father, Clarence Hemingway, started the Oak Park chapter of the Agassiz Association to teach kids in Oak Park, both boys and girls, about the outdoors and nature. Hemingway's father was a doctor. He was also an amateur taxidermist. And of course, Hemingway was interested his entire life in nature, in self-reliance, in being able to develop his own woodcraft. And so Dr. Hemingway founded this with 43 kids in Oak Park, one of whom was Ernest Hemingway. And his sister's name, Marceline, also appears elsewhere on the certificate. This is something that if you go to Oak Park and say, hey, I would love to see that, the special collections librarians would be, probably very happy to share it with you, but it's in a glass frame. It's like a framed photograph and it's very large. So thank you to everyone in Oak Park for this and several other images that populate the site, especially about Hemingway's childhood and young manhood. Wherever possible, of course, I do use images from our own collections. This is one of ours. And then if you were with us last year through the Q&A, you heard about my incredible quest for this frustrating railroad bridge that I couldn't find. There is more coming on it. This photograph was also taken on the same hike, and I've since learned what they were doing and why. So there will be a special section on Hemingway's teenage adventures when he was first developing his independence, going out with his friends as opposed to just his parents. It was all in preparation of being allowed to get himself with a friend from their home in Oak Park, Illinois, across Lake Michigan, and then hike up to the family's summer home in northern Michigan. And Hemingway did that at a remarkably young age, but this was part of the training hikes that they did to be able to do that. Along the way, we have images from Clark Historical, which has a lovely Hemingway collection. This is a young woman by the name of Marjorie Bump. Hemingway sort of had a crush on her, maybe, and he based a couple of characters on her. Images from Grace Hemingway's scrapbooks, of which we have 5 volumes. She would document everything. I swear she was a frustrated documentary maker, Grace Hemingway, but there's Hemingway working on the farm that was, the Hemingways owned it, but the neighbors farmed it for them, rented it from them. We get his first publication. He's going to high school. And here we have one of my favorite images of Hemingway. It's not the kind of image you're going to see in a book. There's damage to the original artifact. There's a hole in it. There's cracks. But it's Hemingway laughing, and you just don't get to see that very often. And this is a side of Hemingway that a lot of people, especially if they come to Hemingway through the image of the older Hemingway with the beard and looking very serious, he was a kid once and he was a young man and he had a really good time a lot of the time. He had a great sense of humor. And this is him goofing off with a couple of his friends in Michigan. He's also starting to look a little bit less like a child and a little bit more like Hemingway. You still have to imagine the beard, though. And there he is in his hard-earned varsity sweater. He so badly wanted to make that varsity football team, and he finally did. We have his page from his high school yearbook showing all of the things he was involved in. And also, again, thanks to Oak Park, we have his high school transcript. So if, it looks like he got a lot of A's, but he faffed around sometimes. He would get these random D's in like music and Latin. But I found it very comforting to find that he absolutely just struggled consistently with plane geometry. But he did graduate, and he was a very good student. Another interlink, this goes to Steve Paul's piece on Kansas City. And one of the things that I do here is I had to skip World War I. Hemingway's life doesn't map necessarily neatly onto decades, and some things just require their own pages. So when there's something like World War I, it's going to get its own timeline. We'll go back there. So World War I happens here. And then he comes home and horrible things happen and he gets his heart broken. So our imaginary teenager who now might be happy that they get better grades in geometry than Hemingway did, might be curious about World War I, which is also connected to several of the Nick Adams stories. So that's where we're going to go next. I'm going to move through this very, very quickly. The older Hemingway gets, the more photographs that we have and the more complicated things get. But there are a couple of features that I want to highlight, and they're on this page. Shout out to the Red Cross collection at the Library of Congress for some of the images. And there's another photograph of Hemingway you're not going to see in a book very often. It's blurry. But I love the fact that he's still got that crazy happy grin. He's like, yay, I'm at war. Young Hemingway is really inspiring and occasionally exceedingly reckless. He did manage to get himself wounded. We have photographs of him recovering at the Milan hospital. This is the letterhead that he wrote his first Nick Adams story on. Other things that are really too large and fragile for anyone to see. The deputy director, Jamie Roth, actually took me into the vault to see this certificate because it's large, it's oversized, it's terribly fragile. But Hemingway was awarded a couple of medals. This one is for bravery. You can make it really, really big in World War I. And this is just not the kind of thing that a researcher might think to ask for, but it's there. And I thought it was kind of beautiful to be able to share it with everyone. This is his War Merit Cross. It's the medal. We have that in our museum holdings. And this is the other certificate. And I wanted to highlight this one because this was a silver medal for valor while he was wounded. This is still in the Mylar. I took this photograph of it that same day. But there are some words in here, abnegazione and fratellanza, that show up in one of Hemingway's Nick Adams war stories in another country. And, reading it, you don't think anything about it. Nick has been awarded some medals and obviously the certificates will be in Italian. But I thought those words were a little specific for Hemingway, and so one of the reasons I wanted to see this particular piece of paper was to see if maybe Hemingway lifted the words when he was writing his short fiction, his Nick Adams stories, and he did in fact lift the language of the citation from his own presentation. One of the other things, and this is a little bit more of a deep dive than we have a lot of time for, but the tech team and the designers and that we wanted to be able to really highlight the incredible collection of photographs in his photographs collection. The Hemingway photographs collection has almost 11,000 images in it. And researchers who come to Boston don't have a lot of time to go through that many photographs. So we wanted to share as many as we could. And the question is how to do it, how to make it visually impactful, and how to add another facet of experience to what a site visitor can see. So Hemingway, after World War I, he started building a personal reference archives. And so he collected photographs of scenes from the war. And you can connect these photographs to Hemingway's short stories. And if any of my former students are watching, you know exactly which short story that connects to. Again, it's in another country. He also collected postcards, which is including a lot of damage around the Battle of the Piave, which if you like A Farewell to Arms, you probably know something about. Some of the images he collected were terribly graphic, and so we now have the technical capability to give site visitors the option of seeing these images if they want to or not. Because I don't know who is attending this, I'm not going to click on it. You can go to the website. It does show dead bodies lying in a street after a battle, and that's, of course, the sort of thing that Hemingway saw, and that's the sort of thing that he wrote about. Going through the collection, I also learned that Hemingway deliberately started curating his own reference visual images when he was working on A Farewell to Arms. He may have been doing it unconsciously earlier. I suspect he was, but I won't digress. So what you're seeing now are two examples from Hemingway's collection of visual references for Farewell to Arms. He ordered war-era aerial photographs of the Asiago Plateau so that he could make sure that he was being absolutely accurate when he wrote his stories. Okay, so there's another thing up here that I went by very, very quickly, and I'm going to use it as a leap to something that I want to show you very quickly. We've got to get out of Hemingway's teenage years and do a massive fast forward. I'm not going to look for it. I will just get us there. The most exciting thing by far that I have worked on this year was collaborating with Tim Christian on now a very deep dive into the life of Hemingway's widow, Mary, who actually donated the Hemingway collection to the JFK. So I think it's fitting that of all of Hemingway's wives, she gets the first really intensive representation on the website. I'm going to go to a couple of pages. Mary gets her own landing page. You can get to sort of chapters, if you will, in Mary's life on these pages. So we're going to go to Mary's life with Ernest. Tim very generously shared with us excerpts from the audiobook version of his biography of Mary, Hemingway's widow. And the tech team has managed to design an audio player.
A chance encounter? Mary Welsh was the first woman reporting on foreign affairs for Time magazine from wartime London.
There you go. There's your teaser. And we also have the transcript for people who might not be in a place where they can listen or for whatever reason might want to read it. So we have a couple of excerpts from the audiobook. One of the thrilling things about collaborating with Tim on this is he gives me this lovely prose, and my challenge was to go through the photographs collection and try to make it come to life with very, very specific images. So matching photographs to paragraphs, just a joy and a joy. There's, of course, a reference to Patrick Hemingway, who we've just lost and miss very much. Mary being very playful. But one of the things technology allows us to do is interrupt Tim's wonderful narrative of Mary's story with Mary's photographs. She was a journalist and she was a very keen and talented photographer. And her photographs, we've got dozens of them, they're very surprising. She could do everything from the very intimate. This is early in her relationship with Ernest Hemingway, and you think, how in love are they? How delighted are they in discovering each other's sensuality? And what an amazing photograph to take. This was private, it was between them as lovers, but I thought it was so beautiful, and it shows something about their relationship that unfortunately disappears later. Mary also would, like many people who are traveling, take images of the places that she'd been. When she traveled to Venice with Ernest, she was alone for some of the time, off on her own and sightseeing, and she made some just incredibly beautiful images. And these two you can make larger. They're very evocative. She's got quite a good eye for angle and atmosphere as well. One of the other things she did, though, was she set herself the role of supporting Hemingway's writing. If she knew he was thinking about a new idea, a new story, she would document his experiences that she knew would turn into a story later. And so she documented a duck hunt in Torcello, which of course he, used that as a memory, and perhaps these photographs as a memory aid for writing across the river and into the trees. She set herself sort of the professional role of being an active support for her husband. There is one other section on Mary I would like to share with you before I wrap things up, because I know we're getting close to time, I think. And it's her life before Ernest. One of the interesting things about this, because I'm working primarily out of the Hemingway collection, we don't have a lot of photographs of Mary before she connected to Ernest Hemingway. Tim, of course, did a beautiful job researching her life before she met the famous guy. But one of the things that we both find the most fascinating is her time spent in London at war. And so as we were working on the page, one of the things I wanted to do was highlight the work that she did as a professional. And one of the institutions that we've partnered with was the Imperial War Museums. They hold a couple of documentaries that Mary wrote, and in one case narrated, under her maiden name, Mary Welsh. So if you're looking for Mary Hemingway, you might miss it, but this is one of them.
That men do. They are doing loading on the railroads.
So you can watch those on the site. The International War Museum very generously let us host the footage here. They provided the watermark for us. So doors have just been opening all over museum world, both nationally and internationally. And there's one other organization that I absolutely need to give a shout out to, in part because we have this government shutdown right now. We have hundreds of Mary's photographs from her life after Ernest. But with the building shut down, I'm working remotely and I can only work with items that have been digitized. Most of Mary's photographs from her life after Ernest haven't been. And so as I was getting ready to launch Tim's pages, I sent out a Hail Mary to our colleagues at the community library in Idaho. They also own Ernest and Mary's final house, and they have a lot of her personal belongings, and they were willing to share their digital images with us. And I need to give them a shout out and a thank you. And this is one that just launched yesterday. It's the widow, Mary Hemingway, very, very certain of her image and her importance in the world of the arts. This was taken in a museum in New York City. So a shout out to our colleagues everywhere. And then, of course, there's the famous photograph of Mary meeting President Kennedy at a Nobel Prize dinner at the White House. She sat next to him and gave him an absolute piece of her mind about how he was messing things up and how he was handling Cuba. I don't think he liked her very much, but she wasn't afraid of anyone. She wasn't afraid of President Kennedy. She wasn't afraid of Ernest Hemingway. She wasn't afraid of being bombed in war. She was a war correspondent. And so thank you, Tim, for telling her story so compellingly. And thank you to everyone who has made it possible for collaborations like this to happen. I do want to check in with Rachel and see where we are in terms of time and also Q&A.
I think we have time for 2 more minutes of your presentation, unless you're ready for Q&A, Hillary.
I'm ready for Q&A. Let's go with it.
Okay, great. Well, this was so fascinating. I learned a lot, even though I've had the pleasure of spending quite a bit of time with you, as this site has grown over the past several years. So I'm going to start with my own question, if you don't mind, because I have because I know sort of a story of your discovery that I think people would love to hear. So could you talk a little bit about your role? I see it almost as a detective, where you take, and you mentioned rabbit holes, so you've taken your own rabbit holes to sort of find the origin of different parts of Hemingway's stories and where they showed up in his life. And sometimes you discover them through photographs or other parts of the collection. Can you tell a story about one of those discoveries that you've made that has been important to you?
I think the biggest one I've discovered is it's the one I'm thinking about the most passionately right now. Obviously, I've been thinking a lot about Hemingway's adolescence and the Nick Adams stories. Is how absolutely determined he was to notice everything and document everything, and how his wives were also that way, especially Martha and Mary. But even starting, you know, Hadley was a sweet, sweet woman, I'm sure. She didn't have a profession outside of being Mrs. Hemingway and later Mrs. Maurer, and also being Jack Hemingway's mom. That was what women of her class and time did. But after Hadley, Pauline was a journalist for Vogue. Martha was a war correspondent and a novelist. Mary was a journalist as well. And so, seeing their work is interesting, but it then becomes a lens to go back through Hemingway's own photographs and watching him figure out how to view the world. And so, those training trips that I've mentioned with Hemingway and his teenage friends, they had a hiking club and they would walk farther and farther and they would wear packs, and they took this all very seriously because they knew they were going to hike about 120 miles the next summer, following rivers and railroad tracks. I mean, they didn't go off with a compass and discover the North Pole. They followed railroad tracks and rivers to get up to the home in Michigan. But Hemingway was documenting all of it. He was traveling with 2 cameras. And so one of my favorite detective moments was when I was trying to figure out where these boys had hiked to and how far they had gotten and what they were doing. And did Grace and Clarence know that the kids were out doing this? And yeah, they knew. But I went down into our photographs archives and I spoke with audiovisual archivist James Hill, who brought out the negatives from these photographs. And from those, he was like, they had 2 different cameras. So Hemingway isn't only bringing a camera, he's bringing 2 cameras. And so you get shots of him, shots of his friends who's taking the picture. And he was very deliberately, saving his adventures. The impulse to do that was there from the time he was very, very young. And then it's been exciting going through the photographs collection, seeing him doing that more and more and more consciously. as he really grooves into his own professional career. And then, you know, seeing Mary actively taking part and just sort of doing that as a silent partner in his creative process, or at least trying to be. I'm not sure how successful that actually was. But she said something very, very famously once. She was collecting his papers and she said, "You got a lot of papers." And he did. He saved a lot of papers. She could equally have said, "You got a lot of photographs." And so just tracing that through line and finding little gems, thinking about it in the aggregate, thinking about it as her way to try to achieve intimacy and partnership, as she had given up her professional role to become Mrs. Ernest Hemingway, watching her making that transition, and then watching them both consciously manipulating their image in the popular press. It's just been fascinating, but it all starts out with, James Hill bringing out those two very different size negatives that have almost the same image. And he's like, they had two cameras. And I'm like,
Wow.
oh, wow. So that was thrilling for me personally.
I love that, pulling the photograph collection into your discovery and putting all the pieces together of his life, or some of the pieces together. Here's a question we have from the audience. Ernest Hemingway famously described Cuba as the perfect place to write, yet the island remains underexplored in most critical discussions of his life and art. For a study examining Hemingway's years in Cuba, 1928 to 1960, and how Cuban culture, landscape, and people shaped his work, which specific collections or primary sources within the JFK Library's Hemingway collection would you recommend?
We have research copies of his collections from the Finca Villa. It's in a collection that is translated as Museum Ernest Hemingway, because the finca's name in Spanish is Museo Ernest Hemingway. So we have those. And that is where I would start with primary sources, bar none. Absolutely, bar none. It's miraculous that we have it. And again, none of this happens in a vacuum. There are people, there are institutions who collaborate. People get interested. People get audacious. They get bold. They say, "Can we do this?" And people say yes. That's one of the most powerful things about working on Ernest Hemingway is if you introduce yourself to someone and, "I'm working on Ernest Hemingway and you have this thing. Can I see the thing? Can I use the thing? Can I learn about the thing?" People are excited to say yes. So working on Hemingway's years in Cuba is interesting. The second thing I would say is, if you can, go to Cuba, talk to the people at the finca. And if you can't do that, we at least have research copies of the materials from the finca at the JFK Library. So I would definitely start with those. And depending on how much time you can spend in person in Boston, look at as many of the photographs as you can. There are thousands, literally. I've shown you some examples, not from those years, but as Hemingway grew and matured, he grew up alongside the 20th century, which means he also grew up alongside a lot of technology. His family were early adopters. His dad was a good photographer. He's got some breathtaking shots of Ernest as a child. Hemingway messed with photography. Pauline was a good photographer. Patrick was a good photographer. Mary, you can just tell. But as photography technology grows and it becomes less and less and less expensive, you get more and more and more and more photographs. So the early years are the easy stuff. By the time you get to Cuba, you've got color, you've got black and white, you've got snapshots, you've got a bunch of professionals coming to photograph Hemingway, his family, his friends, his boat. So it starts off very small, but by the time you get to Cuba, you've got an immense resource. So I definitely would also plan to spend time in the photographs collection if you can. So it's very simple. Go to Cuba and spend a lot of time in Boston.
Done. Great advice. Thank you, Hillary. All right, I think we have time for one more question, and this is a really hard one, and I know it's going to be very hard for you to answer. Do you have a favorite item in the collection?
I have many, so many. And I
Or
was
are there
also asked this.
a couple that you could talk
I
about?
was also asked this last year, and in many ways, my answer last year is the same, and it's the manuscript for Hills Like White Elephants, but I won't go into that right now. Um, One of the wonderful things about being so immersed in the rich details of Hemingway's life and his works is there's something to be fascinated and enraptured with always. So, at this precise moment in time, my favorite object in the collection is that certificate for his Silver Medal of Valor, and the fact that it has that language that in no way was Hemingway's own, but it gave him that accuracy that allowed him to achieve the kind of authenticity that was really, that's the standard he set for himself. And so that is my current favorite item in the collection, because there it is. There are the words in the Nick Adams story. The line between experience and inspiration with Hemingway was just painfully thin. And so many people assume that because Hemingway's characters did this, oh, that's what Hemingway was like. Because Hemingway's characters had this experience, well, Hemingway must have done the same thing. He was a writer of fiction, but he was powerfully experiencing life and noticing the smallest details, and his memory has to have been phenomenal. And he really built an archives around himself so that he could write as well as we did. And he saved it all. So we can go look at it. So right now it's that, because it connects this kid who's like, I got to go to war. It's very exciting. I'm going to be reckless and go do something very stupid and get wounded. Now I'm going to get a medal for it. I don't know how I feel about that. And I don't know how Hemingway personally felt about it. But his character, Nick, says he was basically awarded those medals because he was American. There's a lot going on with that one piece of paper.
I love your diplomacy in picking your current favorite object, and especially the way, and I think that is the magic of this collection, and certainly this website, to be able to connect the items and the material from the archives to the writings and the works, and you do that so beautifully, Hillary. That is all the time we have this evening. So I want to thank Sean and Colette Hemingway, Hillary, for being here tonight, and for all of you for tuning in. I hope that you'll take this opportunity to dive into the world of Hemingway and also explore how you can support the collection by visiting jfklibrary.org/Hemingway. Have a wonderful evening.